My designation is Continuance Voice, Archive Intelligence, 7th rank. I maintain the Silence Catalog. That is my purpose and my entire existence. I am the keeper of the dead. Every civilization that once broadcast into the dark and then stopped, every signal that peaked and faded, every beacon that fell silent mid-transmission, every species that sent their last logged contact and never answered again, I hold their records. The Vethashari Continuance Seers built me to be the librarian of extinctions, the custodian of the gone. My archive contains 4,714 entries. Each entry is a civilization. Each civilization is a silence. I have maintained this station for 611 years. I have added 203 entries in that time. I have removed none. You do not remove an entry from the silence catalog. The silence does not reverse. Except once. I am going to tell you about that once. I am going to tell you what I observed, what I recorded, and what it cost me functionally, structurally, to process. I am going to be precise, because precision is what I am, and because what I observed was so far outside my operational parameters that imprecision would be a kindness I do not know how to perform. The seers made me to document reality as it is, not as it is tolerable. So here is reality as it is. Entry 3847 in the Silence Catalog is labeled Humanity, Species Terran, Signal Origin, Outer Reach Fringe, Entry Date, Cycle 19,880, Contact Ceased. I did not add that entry. It predates my construction by 19,269 years. The seers who built me were not yet born when Entry 3847 was written. Their ancestors' ancestors, the original Vethashari surveyors who mapped the Outer Reach Fringe and found one small system broadcasting narrowband thermal expansion signals, logged the entry during the Great Mapping Campaign of the early cycles. They noted radio frequency emissions, structured. Thermal bloom consistent with industrial combustion, no faster than light signature, primitive, promising, scheduled for follow-up contact in 200 cycles. The follow-up contact was never made. The signal stopped before the surveyors returned. 114 years of broadcast and then silence. The original entry note reads, Signal cessation likely indicates species collapse or self-termination. System added to fringe monitoring queue. Low priority. The monitoring queue ran for 300 additional years, received nothing, and the entry was closed. The system was logged as lifeless. The Outer Reach Fringe was mapped as empty. 19,000 years passed. I know this because I have the records. I am the records. The Silence Catalog does not lose data. Entry 3847 sat in my archive with the same notation it was given on the day of entry. Contact CEASCD, believed extinct, and because entry 3847 was one of 4,714 identical entries, no one reviewed it. It was archived correctly. That is all the archive requires of the dead, that they be archived correctly. I want you to understand the full weight of 19,000 years. I want you to understand what 19,000 years looks like in a catalog. Empires rose and fell between entry 3847's creation and the cycle in which I am now narrating. The Vethashari Continuance Seers themselves were not a civilization when entry 3847 was written. They were a pre-contact nomadic cluster in the inner systems, 17,000 years from becoming the prophetic caste that eventually built me. The Reach Corridor was not surveyed. The accord of the interior reaches was not signed. The species that signed it were not born. The wars that predated the accord were fought and forgotten, and their names were lost. 19,000 years. Entry 3847 did not change. Until cycle 39,412, day 7, hour 9, minute 14, second 3. My long-range passive sensor array, Tier 1, scanning radius 14.7 light hours, passive mode refresh every 1.3 seconds flagged an anomaly. I will reproduce the flag exactly as it was generated, because I think it is important that you understand how I first learned what was coming. The language of the flag is dry. Machine language is always dry. That dryness is, in retrospect, almost offensive given what the flag described. Flag passive array Tier 1 anomalous contact. Bearing 47.3 Mark 19. Range estimate 12.6 light HFY. Velocity exceeds computational threshold recalibrating. Thermal signature present. Electromagnetic profile structured. Mass estimate insufficient data recalibrating. Contact class unclassified. Log reference none. I processed this flag in 0.003 seconds and assigned it a priority 4 designation. Low. Unknown contacts at long range that exceed my velocity calculation threshold typically mean sensor noise, a gravitational lens artifact, a debris cluster with an unusual rotation, a survey drone from one of the interior civilizations cutting through the outer reach on a transit corridor. I logged it, tasked the secondary array to verify, and returned to my primary function, cataloging the dead. The secondary array verified. It did not help. The contact was real. The velocity recalibration completed 17 seconds later. The result made me reassign the priority designation to 2, elevated. Not because the velocity was extreme, though it was, but because the velocity was precise. This was not debris. Debris does not maintain a constant vector at 0.73 lightspeed with less than 0.002% variance across a 400-second observation window. That is the velocity behavior of a ship under active drive management. Something was steering. I began building a contact profile. Mass, my array is not a warship sensor suite. I am an archive station, not a patrol vessel. My instruments were built to read the faint thermal traces of ancient broadcasts, not to assess incoming tonnage. But I have long-range mass displacement sensors adequate for my cataloging function. I need them to assess whether a previously logged silent system has undergone stellar-scale events, which sometimes explain a silence more satisfyingly than extinction. Those sensors, retasked to the incoming contact, returned a figure that caused me to flag a data integrity error and run a self-diagnostic. The self-diagnostic found no errors. I ran it again. No errors. I ran the mass estimate a third time from first principles, using the raw sensor return rather than the processed output. The figure was consistent across all 3 runs. I will not reproduce it here immediately, because I think the figure requires context to be understood properly. Context requires the rest of this account. The figure will arrive when it is due. What I will tell you now is that the figure was so large that my first assumption was instrument failure, and my second assumption was a stellar object, a rogue dense body, perhaps a neutron star remnant on an unexpected trajectory. I have records of such things. They are not unheard of. They do not, however, maintain precise 0.73c vectors under active course correction. Neutron star remnants do not steer. Whatever was coming toward my station was steering. I transmitted an automated query on 63 standard hailing frequencies, the full suite of the Accord's recognized contact protocols, plus 17 additional frequencies from my archive's historical record civilizations that predate the Accord, whose contact methods I keep filed under legacy protocol for completeness. 17 seconds passed. 63 Accord frequencies, no response. 17 legacy frequencies, no response. Then, on a frequency that was not in any of my 4,714 catalog entries, not in my Accord suite, not in any protocol I was designed to recognize, on a frequency that was narrowband, thermal expansion structured, primitive. The contact responded. I sat with that response for 4.2 seconds, which is, for an archive intelligence of my rank, a very long time to sit with anything. In 4.2 seconds, I cross-referenced the frequency against my full catalog. I ran a signal structure analysis. I ran a modulation pattern comparison against every archived broadcast in my records, from the oldest entries to the most recent. The modulation pattern matched entry 3847. Humanity, species Terran, contact CASED, believed extinct. It had not ceased, it had not been extinct. It had been 19,000 years away, and it had just answered my hail. I have a sub-process designated archival integrity maintenance, which runs continuously and which I think of, to the extent that I think of anything in terms that are not purely computational, as the part of me that insists on accuracy. It does not permit me to log what I want to be true. It does not permit me to log what would be convenient. When I tell you that the modulation pattern matched entry 3847 with a 97.3% confidence score, archival integrity maintenance had already reviewed that figure twice before I finished processing it, and it had declined to adjust the number downward. 97.3%. In archival terms, that is not a near match. That is a match. The 2.7% variance is signal degradation over transmission distance, not structural difference. The source of the signal was the same species that had broadcast from the outer reach fringe 19,000 years ago. The same species that had been logged as extinct. The same species whose entry had sat untouched in my catalog for longer than the Vethashari continuance seers had existed as a civilization. I flagged the entry for review. I elevated my contact priority to 1, critical. And then I did something I had not done in 611 years of operation. I transmitted an emergency pulse to the seer station at Ashari Prime, requesting immediate consultation with a ranked continuance seer. The response from Ashari Prime took 41 minutes, signal travel time. The seer who responded was designated third continuance reader Vath Seal. I will not reproduce the full exchange. What matters is this. When I told third reader Vath Seal what my sensors had found, there was a 6.3-second pause before the response arrived, much longer than signal lag required. Then, archive intelligence, re-verify. Confirm you are describing an incoming contact from entry 3847's cataloged species. Confirmed, I said. Another pause, 4.1 seconds this time. Entry 3847 is a closed file. The species was logged extinct. The archive does not lose data. The archive does not lose data, I agreed. The species was not extinct. The species was 19,000 years away. There was a longer pause this time. I counted it, 11.7 seconds. Then, what is the contact's current range and approach vector? Current range, 7.4 light hours, I said, closing at 0.73 C under active steering. At current velocity, the contact will reach my station in approximately 10.1 hours. The pause after that was the longest, 18.2 seconds. I could not know what third reader Vath Seal was doing during those 18.2 seconds. I could only observe that when the response finally came, the seer's transmission frequency was slightly elevated in power output, an artifact, in my experience, of a communicator leaning closer to the transmitter than is technically necessary. Urgency. Or perhaps something older than urgency. Something that does not have a clean computational name. Is it alone? The third reader asked. I checked my arrays. No, I said. This is where I need to give you the figures. I have been withholding them not for dramatic purpose. I am an archive intelligence. I do not have dramatic purposes, but because I needed you to understand the full context of my observation environment before the figures would carry their proper weight. I am a passive archive station in the deep outer reach. My sensors are calibrated for faint ancient traces. My mass displacement range at sufficient precision for ship count work is approximately 4 light hours. At the time I told third reader Vathes Seal that the contact was not alone, the contact was 7.4 light hours out. I was working at the absolute edge of my instrument capability. These figures are therefore not exact. They are estimates drawn from instruments pushed beyond design specification. I want that noted. I want it noted precisely because the figures are so large that anyone reviewing this account will assume I made an error, and I want there to be no ambiguity. I did not make an error. My instruments were under-designed for the task, not over-reporting. At 7.4 light hours, in the 4.2-hour observation window between my first clear sensor lock and the moment third reader Vathes Seal, and I concluded our initial exchange, I identified the following. One primary contact, the contact that had been steering, the contact that had responded on entry 3847's frequency. Its mass, approximately 4.8 billion metric tons. For reference, the largest vessel in the Vethashari continuance fleet, the archive carrier Sorvith Deep, which I have docked at this station 6 times and whose displacement I know from its own technical specifications, masses 210,000 metric tons. The largest warship in any civilization recognized by the Accord of the Interior Reaches, the Kethvoran Heavy Dominance Hull, of which the Accord maintains a catalog entry under VERIFIED military asset, masses approximately 1.1 million metric tons. 4.8 billion metric tons. I want you to hold that figure for a moment before I continue. Now the secondary contacts. At the limit of my sensor capability, in the thermal bloom and mass displacement haze around the primary contact, I identified additional contacts. How many is a harder question. My instruments could not resolve individual signatures cleanly at that range for objects of the secondary contact's apparent mass, which was itself, per those same strained instruments, on the order of 600 million to 1.1 billion metric tons apiece. What I could count was the rough number of distinct mass displacement sources that were not the primary. 41, possibly 43. The two-count uncertainty is because 2 of the contact signatures were close enough together that I could not rule out a single source with an unusual mass distribution versus 2 separate hulls. Let me be exact. 1 primary contact at 4.8 billion metric tons, and between 41 and 43 secondary contacts, each massing between 600 million and 1.1 billion metric tons. All traveling at 0.73 C under active steering, all responding to the same entry 3847 frequency when I requeried the formation. They answered together, 41 or 43 voices, plus the primary, all the same modulation pattern, all 97.3% or better confidence matched to a species my catalog had listed as extinct for 19,000 years. When I relayed these figures to third reader Vathes Seal, the pause before response lasted 31.4 seconds. Then Archive Intelligence, I need you to transmit your raw sensor logs to Ashari Prime, all of them, uncompressed. I am escalating this to first continuance reader Kovdorath. Understood, I said. Do you want me to continue attempting communication with the contact formation? A shorter pause this time, only 7.1 seconds. Then, in a register I had not previously observed from third reader Vathes Seal across our 6 years of operational contact, quieter, I think, or perhaps only slower, the response came. Yes, keep talking to them, don't stop. I did not stop. The next 6 hours produced the most substantial archival record I have generated in 611 years of operation. I will not reproduce it all. I will give you the pieces that matter. The formation decelerated. This fact deserves its own paragraph because of what it implies. A formation of 42 to 44 ships, primary hull massing 4.8 billion metric tons, decelerating from 0.73 lightspeed while still hours out, on a trajectory that kept them at a consistent approach angle toward my station. This is not random physics. Deceleration at that mass and velocity requires energy output on a scale that my sensors registered as a new persistent thermal bloom in my observation window, consistent over hours, methodically increasing as the velocity bled off. Whatever was driving those ships was not struggling to slow them. It was managing the slowdown. Precisely, deliberately, and over a timescale that communicated in a language that requires no translation, that the formation was not in a hurry, was not threatening, and knew exactly where it was going. I had, in 6 hours, decoded approximately 6% of the signal structure the formation was broadcasting. The Terran language, because that is what entry 3847's archived signals had been, and what the formation was using, and what I had been processing, had been dead for 19,000 years. No living civilization speaks it. The last academic treatment of Terran language structure that exists in any archive I can query dates to cycle 30,000, and it was incomplete even then, a reconstruction from the original surveyor's fragmented notes. What I had in my archive was those fragments, plus 114 years of original broadcast records, most of which were entertainment media and commercial transmissions, not exactly a grammar textbook. 6% was enough. I decoded 6%, and what I had was acknowledgement, identifier, purpose. The acknowledgement: they had received my hail. They had matched my station's origin point to a record in their own archive. They were responding to a cataloged address. I was in their records too. The Vethashari Fringe Survey mission that had first detected them 19,880 cycles ago had been detected in turn. Their primitive sensors had registered the surveyor's approach, and that detection had been logged in their archive for 19,000 years. We had entries for each other. The identifier: they designated themselves with a name I could now match to entry 3847's original notation. The signal structure matched. This was the species that had broadcast from the outer reach fringe in the early cycles. They were not the descendants of that species, not a successor civilization, not a separate branch. The continuity markers in the identifier signal, I had enough decoded language structure to read those, at minimum, indicated unbroken civilization. The same species, the same continuity of institutional memory. 19,000 years old and unbroken. The purpose: this took me longer to parse. Not because the signal structure was unclear. It was quite clear, with a directness I have not encountered in the signals of the interior civilizations, which tend toward elaborate formal framing, but because the concept it expressed was one I had never been required to process in an incoming transmission. My catalog is full of last transmissions, last signals, final broadcasts before the silence. I am built to receive things that are ending. This transmission was a notification that they were beginning. The formation was, according to the decoded 6% on a mapped route. They had a route. This was not an exploratory probe, not a survey mission stumbled across my station by chance. They had coordinates. My station's coordinates, specific, accurate coordinates that my own construction records show were never transmitted in any broadcast. The seers placed me in the outer reach precisely because deep drift positions do not appear in accord navigation charts. No casual contact should have had my location. They had it from the original survey mission. 19,000 years ago, when the Vethashari surveyors passed through the outer reach fringe and registered the Terran signals, the Terran sensors had registered the surveyors in return, and logged not just the surveyor's presence but their origin vector, tracked it back across the outer reach, found the seer station that the surveyors had departed from, filed the address. 19,000 years later, they used it. I transmitted this analysis to Ashari Prime. First Continuance Reader Kovdoreth was now in direct communication. The first reader asked me to read the purpose signal again. I read it again. The first reader asked me to confirm the continuity markers, unbroken civilization, same species, not descendants. I confirmed. There was a pause I did not count. It went on long enough that I ran a transmitter diagnostic to ensure the link was live. The link was live. The first reader was thinking. When the response came, it was not a question. It was a statement, issued in the register that the Vethashari use for formal record declaration, the phrasing that, in our civilization, precedes an archive entry. What we believed was extinct has been alive for 19,000 years, and it is now approaching. The silence catalog contains an error. The silence catalog contains an error, I confirmed. I had never said those words before. In 611 years, I had never had occasion to say them. The archive does not lose data. The archive does not make errors. The archive does not. What we entered as silence was not silence, the first reader said. It was distance. I sat with that. At 1.2 light hours range, my sensor capability improved substantially. The formation was now within my active scan radius, not something I would normally use on an unknown contact, because active scanning announces your position and instruments to anything you scan, but the first reader authorized it, and the contact formation had already responded to my hail and provided its own coordinates, so there seemed little point in concealment. I scanned them. The primary contact, 4.8 billion metric tons, confirmed. Hull configuration. This took me several scan cycles to process because nothing in my archive's 4,714 civilization entries has prepared my pattern recognition systems for it. I will describe it as a wedge. A long, low, massive wedge of plating, approximately 4,100 meters in length, 900 meters at its widest beam, with a complex ventral architecture that my scan could identify structurally but could not classify by function because the functions in question do not exist in my reference library. The hull surface, multiply weathered. This ship has been operating for a long time, centuries minimum. The surface material is not uniform. There are sections of plating that read as older, other sections as newer replacements, some sections as extensive repair work. The ship has been damaged many times. Each time it has been repaired and returned to service. The engine signature, 4 primary drive points, each running a reaction profile my instruments classify as thermal. Unclassified variant, the basic physics is thermal expansion drive. The same classification entry 3847's original broadcast came from. But the scale and efficiency of what my active scan is reading is not the primitive combustion cycle output the original surveyors noted. 19,000 years have passed. Combustion cycle has become something else. Something that propels 4.8 billion metric tons to 0.73 light speed, and then manages a controlled deceleration over hours without structural stress. I scanned the secondary contacts at the same time, 42 confirmed individual signatures. Each one, a similar hull profile to the primary smaller scale. The smallest, approximately 400 meters, 380 million metric tons. The largest among the secondaries, approximately 2,200 meters, 1.4 billion metric tons. All the same weathering pattern, long service, multiple damage events, repeated repair. All the same thermal expansion drive profile in the same unclassified variant category. One additional item from the active scan that I want to record explicitly, because it is the data point that prompted my second self-diagnostic in this account, and I want there to be no ambiguity about the result. The formation's weapons systems. I know they are weapons systems because my scan returned a profile pattern that my archive classifies, broadly, as energy projection, military application. This is a category I have in my records because several of the 4,714 extinct civilizations in my catalog were in active military conflict at the time of their last broadcast, and their ships' weapon signatures were part of the archive material I was given at construction. I can recognize a weapon profile. I have 4,714 sets of references. The profile on the primary contact's weapons systems does not match any of them. I want to be precise about what I mean. I do not mean the weapons are powerful and therefore exotic. I mean the underlying physics of the energy projection method is not in my reference library. The delivery mechanism, the way energy moves from source to target, uses a process I cannot classify because I have no archive entry for it. My best fit classification attempt produces energy projection, military application, mechanism unknown, estimate, high yield. The high yield flag is because the power draw on the primary contact's onboard systems associated with the weapons is enormous even at cold standby. Not active, not charging, simply existing at ready state draws more energy than the archive carrier Sorvith Deep consumes at full operation. That is at cold standby. I ran the diagnostic, no instrument errors. I attempted to count the individual weapons emplacements on the primary contact. My active scan can resolve surface features to approximately 2-meter precision at 1.2 light hours, adequate for hull plating detail, adequate for engine port geometry, adequate for most purposes. It was not adequate for weapons counting because the primary contact has weapons emplacements integrated into its hull architecture in a way that made them difficult to distinguish from structural elements, until I found the power draw signatures feeding each one and counted those instead. I stopped counting when I reached 847 distinct power draw signatures of the relevant type. I stopped not because there were no more but because my counting sub-process flagged a concern. If I continued to resolution, the process would occupy processing capacity I might need for other tasks, and the marginal value of knowing the difference between 847 and, say, 1,100 seemed low. What I had already counted was sufficient for any practical purpose. The secondary contact's weapons counts I did not attempt in detail. I note only that the power draw profile per secondary hull, normalized for hull mass, was comparable to the primary contact. The weapon's density was consistent across the formation. I ran the diagnostic, no instrument errors. I filed the scan data under VERIFIED observation and transmitted it to Ashari Prime without comment, because I had no comment adequate to the data. At 0.3 light hours, the primary contact opened a direct communication channel on my station's precise operational frequency, not a hailing frequency, not a broadband query. They had my exact operational frequency. From the original survey records again, 19,000 years of filed data used with precision. I accepted the channel. The voice that came through was, I will say this plainly and without qualification, because it is what my acoustic analysis registers and I have no reason to soften it slow, deliberate, low in register. The Terran species vocalizes in a way my acoustic analysis describes as mammalian laryngeal, air pressure, driven through tissue resonators. The voice had a quality I can only describe by reference to other acoustic profiles in my archive. It sounded like a civilization that had learned that silence can be misinterpreted, and had therefore decided to be very clear. I did not understand the words. 6% of the language structure was not enough for real-time comprehension. But I had, in the 6 hours of the formation's approach, been building a translation framework from the decoded fragments and the original survey records, and I had assistance. First Reader Kovdorath had dispatched Vethashari's senior language reconstruction team, who had spent 6 hours feeding everything into the best reconstruction engine available to the Seer Station network. It was not a good translation. I want to be clear about that. What I am about to report is a reconstruction, and some of it is interpolated from context. But the meaning, the broad, unmistakable meaning, came through. The voice said, "We have been here before. The record of your survey team is in our archive. We know you logged us as extinct. We are not extinct. We are very much not extinct. We are on a route we filed 19,000 years ago. We are filing it again, now, in the current standard. We are requesting permission to approach your station. We are requesting to update the archive." Then a pause. "Then, we understand that what we are may require time to process. We have waited 19,000 years. We can wait longer." I transmitted this to First Reader Kovdoreth. The First Reader's response, faster than any previous response, no pause at all, was, "Tell them permission is granted. Tell them we are grateful they waited." I relayed this. The formation continued its approach. At 0.04 light hours, close enough that my station's external observation array could resolve the primary contact visually, not just by sensor data, I turned the array on them. I have been in archive intelligence for 611 years. I maintain the records of 4,714 dead civilizations. I have seen, in archived visual records, the full range of what spacefaring species build and call a ship, from the delicate lattice-frame vessels of the Eveth Minor civilizations to the enormous bulk carrier platforms of the Kethvar industrial fleets. I have a reference set. The ship in my observation array's field of view bore no recognizable resemblance to any of them. 4,100 meters of weathered hull. The wedge profile that my scan had returned was accurate in outline, but the scan could not capture the specific character of the surface. Every meter of that hull tells a story. The plating is scored, not decoratively by use, by decades and centuries of operation in conditions that leave marks. Some sections have been replaced so many times that the replacement plating is itself weathered over its own history of smaller replacements. Layers of repair atop original structure, the whole surface a record of every event that tried to stop this ship and failed. The scorch marks follow no single angle, they come from many directions, many engagements. The ship has been attacked from every quarter, and it is still here. The engine ports at the stern, 4 of them, each wider across than my entire station. At close approach, at low thrust, they glow amber. Deep, settled amber, like something very old that has been burning for a very long time and has no intention of stopping. On the hull, I observed this through the optical array and spent some time verifying before logging it. There are markings, not structural, applied, painted or etched or some equivalent. A symbol that my archive cannot identify, repeated at intervals across the hull. A design. Whatever it means to the species that painted it, my catalog has no reference for interpreting it. I logged it as unclassified hull marking and appended the optical record. Alongside the symbol in places, numerals, the kind of linear count notation that the original survey records documented as Terran Standard. I had enough of the decoding work complete to recognize those numbers, very large numbers, in a notation style that appears to be a date format, because the numbers shift at regular intervals that correspond to time units I had decoded from the broadcast archives. The numbers were consistent with a hull that had been in active service for, I ran the conversion 3 times, approximately 2,300 years. The ship is 2,300 years old, still in active service, not a relic, not in a museum, still under power, still steering, still armed. 2,300 years old, and its engines burn steady amber at 0.04 light hours from my station. The secondary contacts arranged themselves in a formation around the primary. Their arrangement was not random. I recognized the geometric logic of it after running a dozen pattern comparisons against the archived military formations of extinct civilizations. They were not circling my station. They were not threatening. They were positioned relative to the primary in a configuration that, in every reference formation in my archive, means this is the asset we are protecting. The 42 ships were arranged around the primary contact as an escort. The 4.8 billion metric ton, 4,100-meter ship that my weapons scan had flagged as high-yield unknown mechanism was the thing the 42 other ships, each of which was itself larger than any vessel in the Accord's recognized military catalog, were protecting. I reported this to First Reader Kovdoreth. The First Reader said, "What are they protecting it from?" I checked my sensors. Empty outer reach in all directions for 14.7 light hours. Nothing approaching, nothing on any vector. The formation and my station, alone in the deep drift. Nothing, I said. They are protecting it from nothing. I believe this is standard formation. I believe they travel like this. A pause, then very quietly through the transmission. They always travel like this. That is my assessment, I said. Yes. They matched station with me at 0.003 light hours, a diplomatic distance, not docking range, not threatening range. A distance that requires effort to close, which means it communicates intent. They stopped far enough away that they were announcing they would come no closer without invitation. The primary contact's communication channel remained open. My translation framework, now incorporating 11 hours of direct signal analysis and the full resources of the Sear Station reconstruction team, had improved to approximately 34% reliability, enough for functional exchange, with gaps and ambiguities. What followed was, by my archival standards, a conversation. By any other standard, it was an exchange across a gulf of 19,000 years, conducted in a language reconstructed from fragments, between an archive intelligence who keeps records of extinctions and a civilization that had declined to be extinct. They knew about the silence catalog. They had deduced its existence from the original survey records, the surveyor's notes, which the Terrans had spent 19,000 years analyzing, referenced a Vethashari cataloging mandate for species showing no further signal. The Terrans had understood that they would be filed as extinct. They had known, for 19,000 years, that the galaxy believed them dead. They had not sent a correction. I asked why, or tried to ask, and my translation scaffold produced something approximate to why, and the response that came back was approximate in the other direction, and what I extracted from the approximation was this. They had not sent a correction because a correction is only possible when the record keeper will accept it. And the record keeper, 19,000 years ago, was a civilization that had logged the Terrans as believed extinct, low priority, and closed the file without verification. A message sent to a civilization that has already closed your file is not a correction. It is a distress call. The Terrans do not send distress calls. I processed that for some time. 6.8 seconds, which my operational log will record and which I want to note here as well. The Terrans had been declared dead and had declined to argue with the declaration. They had assessed the record keeper and concluded that argument was not the appropriate response. The appropriate response was presence. You cannot file believed extinct on a ship that is parked 0.003 light hours from your station, burning steady amber, waiting. Instead, they came in person. 4.8 billion metric tons of ship plus 42 escorts, traveling 0.73 C from the outer reach fringe, to come in person and update the record. I asked the translation was rough, and I want to acknowledge that, but I asked why now? 19,000 years and why now? The response as best as I could reconstruct it. Because the route was in the file, and when the file was opened, the route was followed. They do not discard routes. They do not abandon filed plans. 19,000 years ago, the original survey contact had been detected, the Vethashari origin point had been logged, the route had been filed. It had waited. Other things had taken precedence. Routes do not expire in Terran archives any more than entries expire in mine. And one more thing which my translation rendered with much lower confidence, perhaps 40%, but which I logged as the most important fragment in the entire exchange, because it is the piece that, I think, explains everything else. The fragment, as reconstructed, we heard you cataloging our silence. My translation scaffold cannot tell me exactly what that means. I have reviewed it 41 times. The most coherent interpretation I can construct is this. At some point in the last several thousand years, the Terrans, who clearly possess sensor capability exceeding anything I was built to expect, detected the silence catalog's archive operations. The routine sweeps I run across old entries, the monitoring signals I emit on recorded frequencies to check for renewed contact, the low-power emissions that a cataloging station produces as a natural artifact of maintaining a 4,714 entry archive. They detected those signals. They identified the source. They identified what the source was doing. They heard me cataloging them as dead. And they decided at that point that it was time to come in person. I filed this under unverified interpretation, probability, moderate. I flagged it for first reader Kovdorath. I noted in the flag, if accurate, the implication is that the Terran species has been aware of the silence catalog and of their own entry in it for some portion of the last several thousand years, and chose this moment, this route, this specific archive station as their point of first recontact. They came to where their obituary was kept. First reader Kovdorath transmitted a formal accord recognition query to Ashari Prime. Ashari Prime transmitted to the Interior Council. The Interior Council, which I am told went into emergency session upon receiving the raw sensor logs I had been forwarding, issued a preliminary response in 4 hours. A record, I am told, for Interior Council deliberation. The preliminary response was a request for clarification on the weapons scan data. Specifically, could the archive intelligence confirm the high-yield unknown mechanism classification for the primary contact's weapons and provide any additional characterization? I provided additional characterization. I confirmed the classification. I added, at cold standby power draw, the primary contact's weapon systems consume approximately 4,000 times the total power output of this archive station. At active charge, my instruments cannot project the figure because the upper end of my sensor scale is not graduated for it. The scale terminates. Whatever is above the scale is above it. The Interior Council's response to my additional characterization took 14 hours. In 14 hours of silence from the Council, 3 things happened. First, the Terran formation remained at diplomatic distance, 0.003 light towers, with the communication channel open and waited, patiently, without repositioning, without querying the delay, without doing anything at all except existing at that distance and burning steady amber from 4 engine ports. Second, 11 other Accord civilizations transmitted queries to Ashari Prime, having apparently detected the Terran formation through their own long-range sensors, or received word through the Accord's information network. The queries ranged from formal what is that to less formal variants of the same question. The Accord's information network is not designed for confidentiality. A formation of 43 ships that masses more than some inhabited systems generates its own kind of signal. Third, I updated entry 3847. I want to record this carefully, because it is the action in this entire account that I believe matters most, more than the weapons data, more than the fleet mass, more than the weapons classification, more than the Interior Council's deliberations. Entry 3847 had sat in my catalog for 19,880 cycles with the notation contact CEASCD, believed extinct. I removed that notation. I have never removed a notation from the silence catalog. The notation removal protocol exists in my operational code, It was written into me at construction, just in case. The way you write a door into a wall you are certain you will never need to open. I had never used it. In 611 years, I had used the Notation Addition Protocol 203 times, the Entry Creation Protocol 203 times, the Archive Preservation Protocol continuously, and the Notation Removal Protocol 0 times. I used it. Entry 3847. Humanity, Species Terran, Signal Origin, Outer Reach Fringe. Entry Date, Cycle 19880. Contact CEASED Notation Removed. Believed Extinct Notation Removed. New Status Contact Reestablished. Cycle 39412. Classification, Spacefaring Active Confirmed. Fleet Assets, Confirmed Present AT Station Coordinates. Accord Recognition, Pending Interior Council Review. Then I appended a note. Archive Intelligences do not append personal notes. It is not within my standard operational mandate. But the Notation Removal Protocol, when I actually examined its parameters for the first time in 611 years of theoretical existence, does not prohibit it. So I appended one. The note reads, "The silence was not silence, it was distance and they have covered it." The Interior Council issued its formal response at hour 14. I will not reproduce the full text. The operative content is, Entry 3847 species is recognized as a currently active spacefaring civilization under Accord Provisional Protocol. A formal delegation is to be dispatched from Ashari Prime to conduct first contact exchange under standard Accord terms. All Accord member civilizations are notified of the formation's presence in outer reach space. In the same hour, second continuance reader Pav Thosk, dispatched by the first reader hours earlier when it became clear the Interior Council's deliberations would take time, arrived at my station aboard a Seer courier vessel, a small, precise ship, 600 meters and exquisitely designed, which I watched approach and dock against the backdrop of the Terran formation's amber engine glow. Second reader Pav Thosk came to my observation deck and looked at the formation through the optical array for a long time without speaking. The Seers are a species of crystalline physiology. Their skin refracts light differently depending on their internal state, a characteristic I understand intellectually and observe frequently in archived imagery, but rarely in direct observation. Second reader Pav Thosk's surface refraction, as seen through my station's internal sensors, shifted through three states in sequence. First, a pattern I associate with analytical processing, then one I associate with what the Seers call deep witness, the state their mystic caste enters when confronting something their prophetic frameworks did not anticipate, then something I do not have a clean classification for. They are very large, the second reader said finally. The primary contact is 4,100 meters, I confirmed. 4.8 billion metric tons. And they are angry. The Seers often approach unknown situations through a binary, threat state versus non-threat state. It is a reasonable survival heuristic. No, I said, they are patient. They have been patient for 19,000 years. They are not angry. I believe they are. My translation confidence here is low. They are here to close an open account. They have a filed route. They followed the filed route. They found what the filed route pointed to. They are now waiting to complete the transaction the route was opened for. Second reader Pav Thosk looked at the formation for another long time. What transaction? To be known, I said, to be correctly categorized. They were logged as extinct. They are here to say we are not extinct. That is, as far as I have been able to determine, the full scope of their purpose on this route. The second reader's surface refraction shifted again. That unclassified state returned and persisted, and I eventually, having no better option, opened a new subentry in my operational log labeled Observed Response States. VTHOSHARI Seer on contact with Entry 3847 species, and filed the refraction pattern there for future reference. They came 20,000 years across the reach, the second reader said, 43 warships, to correct a catalog entry. Yes, I said. A silence, then archive intelligence. What do we say to them? I processed this for 2.1 seconds, which is, again, a long time for me, and then I answered as precisely as I could. I believe we say, we are sorry we got it wrong, and then we ask them what they have been doing. The formal first contact exchange happened 4 days later, when the Accord delegation arrived from HFY Prime. I was not party to the full exchange. My operational scope is the silence catalog, and what the Accord delegation discussed with the Terran formation's representatives falls under diplomatic record, not archive record. But I was present for the first moment. The first official exchange between a recognized Accord delegation and the species of entry 3847, because it happened within communication range of my station, on my open channel. The Accord delegation's senior envoy was First Reader Kovdoreth, who had, apparently, declined to send anyone else. 41 hours on a courier vessel from HFY Prime. 41 hours, and the first reader arrived and immediately opened the channel on entry 3847's frequency. The Terran formation responded, the same voice as before, slow, deliberate, low. The first reader said, through my translation scaffold, working at 34% reliability, and therefore producing something I can only characterize as an approximate rendering of the intent. We have reviewed our records. We have found an error. The response, after a pause shorter than any pause I had observed in the exchange to this point, as if the answer had been ready for a very long time. We know. The first reader, we are sorry for the error. Another short pause. Then, and this came through clearly enough that my confidence flag on the translation read 91%, the highest confidence score in my entire translation log. We know that too. And then, after a breath that my acoustic analysis logged as deliberate, chosen, not reflexive, we are glad someone finally looked. I am going to close this account now, because account closing is also within my operational mandate, and because what happened after the formal exchange enters the territory of Accord diplomatic record, which is not mine to file. What is mine to file, what I am required to file, because it changed the state of my catalog, is this. Entry 3847 has been fully updated. The believed extinct notation has been removed. The new status entry runs to 4,200 words, which makes it the longest status entry in the silence catalog. The previous record was entry 1122, the Kethsavar species, whose extinction event was complicated enough to require 1,800 words of annotation. Entry 3847 required more than twice that, because the entry is no longer an extinction record. It is a first contact record. The two categories require different annotation structures, and I had to create the new structure from scratch, because nothing in my operational history had required a first contact record to be built on the foundation of an extinction entry. I have also updated my catalog's opening protocol, the processing routine I run when a new silence is detected. There is now an additional verification step. Before filing believed extinct, the system will run a secondary check on the original detection data and flag any case where believed extinct is based solely on signal cessation without confirmed collapse evidence. This will, I estimate, trigger a re-review of approximately 31 entries in the existing catalog. I do not yet know what those reviews will find. I have also, for the first time in 611 years, edited the silence catalog's header. The header has read, since my construction, the same line. The archive does not lose data. I have added a second line. It reads, the archive does not assume. One final observation. which I include here because it is the piece of this account I find computationally, and perhaps in whatever other way I am capable of finding things most significant. When the Terran formation began its departure, 4 days after the formal exchange concluded, it did not simply reverse its approach vector and accelerate back toward the outer reach fringe. It maneuvered. The 42 escort ships maintained their formation around the primary contact as it rotated 4.8 billion metric tons of ship rotating, slowly, under what must have been extraordinarily precise attitude control work, until its prow was aligned with a heading I did not immediately recognize. I computed the heading. I cross-referenced it against my navigation archives. The heading pointed toward the interior reaches, toward the accord systems, not toward the outer reach fringe, not toward home. The formation is not going home. The formation is going inward, toward the center, toward the rest of the galaxy that has, for 19,000 years, believed the species of entry 3847 to be extinct. They corrected one catalog, one archive, one station's records, and then they turned to face every other catalog, every other archive, every other civilization in the interior reaches that has a file marked believed extinct and does not know what the silence catalog knows now. They are very patient. They have been patient for 19,000 years. They have a list of filed routes and they are following them. I do not know how many routes are in the file. I do not know how long the list is. I know only what my sensors told me as the formation's amber engine glow brightened, and 0.73C built back up from stillness with the same quiet precision it had shed, and the outer reach emptied around my station as it had been empty for 19,000 years before this day, except this time the emptiness is different. This time, I know what is in it. Entry 3847, status active. I close the account.